Hello, I'm Mike Meyer. I will explain to you today what to expect at the USCIS interview. Most likely, when you have an interview notice to appear in person at the USCIS, it will concern your adjustment of status, your so-called I-485, which is the last step in the immigration process. But there may be other interviews. We're going to give you the general guidelines. Most importantly, when you receive a so-called interview notice telling you to appear at a certain USCIS office, it will list certain documents that you should bring with you. For example, it might list bring your passport. It might list bring your I-94 card. The I-94 card is the small white card that you filled out usually on the airplane before entering the United States. If you entered on a visa waiver, it would be a green card. It would be an I-94W. However, a person who entered on a visa waiver is unlikely to have a USCIS interview. Rule number 1. When you receive this interview notice, review the documents that you should bring with you. Rule number 2. Please be well dressed. Look professional. Don't have a ring through your nose or a t-shirt with skull and crossbones. You should look professional. Rule number 3, be courteous. And it's not always to be courteous after you've been waiting for your interview for an hour, for 2 hours, or sometimes even longer. No matter what the interview notice says, bring your passport. Make sure you bring all documents with which you entered the United States last, which would be your I-94 card or possibly your advance parole, your I-131, also called travel permit. Make sure that you bring some other form of identification which the officer may ask for. Also make sure that you bring your birth certificate. And by the way, talking about documents, make sure that you always bring the originals. If they are in a foreign language, you should have a certified translation. And you should also bring an additional photocopy. That makes it easier on the officer. For example, let's say the officer asked for a copy of your birth certificate. The officer might have to go and make an additional copy if there is no copy in the file. If you bring the photocopy, everything will go much faster at the interview. If you have to bring translations of documents, for example, a birth certificate, make sure that it has been translated by a competent person who speaks both English and the respective foreign language. Make sure that there's a certification attached to the document that states approximately, translator certification, I, John Doe, speak English and Farsi competently and personally prepared the above translation. It accurately reflects the words and meaning of the original. Then the signature, the date, and I suggest also adding a business card of the person who translated it or the address and telephone number. Also, if you have a social security card, please bring it with you. If the person to be interviewed, you or someone else, does not speak English well, you should provide an interpreter. The interpreter must be a permanent resident or a U.S. citizen and at least 18 years old. I recommend, whenever possible, to bring a court-certified interpreter. For example, many courts certify interpreters for English-Spanish translation and interpretation. What happens at a USCIS interview? Well, you will go to the location indicated on the interview notice. You will pass through security. You probably have to show one form of identification, and most likely you will have to wait there in some kind of waiting room easily for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, sometimes more than that. You will be called, and the officer will usually take you into his or her office. At the office, he or she will usually swear you in, and if an interpreter is present, the interpreter will be sworn in as well. If you go with your attorney, the attorney will not be sworn in because the attorney is not really allowed to answer on your behalf. The oath will be something like, raise your right hand, do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? And you answer yes or I will. Then most likely the officer will identify you ask for your passport, all documents that you use to enter the United States, and possibly one more form of identification, such as a driver's license if you have one. Then, if the officer requested specific documents in the interview notice, he or she may ask for it. For example, it may be tax returns, or it may be a so-called tax clearance certificate, which is a certification from the IRS, from the Internal Revenue, that you did pay your taxes, usually for the past 3 years. You can obtain such a certificate at a local office of the IRS, and you find those addresses on the internet at www.irs.gov, G-O-V like government. When you look at the interview notice and you see words such as unlawful, deny, deportation, it is of utmost importance that you do not go to such an interview alone. You should consult an immigration attorney. Also, if you don't understand clearly what the interview notice says or means, please consult an immigration attorney. If you receive a notice to appear, that is usually not a normal USCIS interview notice. That indicates a much more severe problem. It means usually that you are or will be in deportation proceedings. You must see an attorney in such a case. Another common situation for USCIS interviews is if you apply for a green card based on marriage to a US citizen. There it is quite normal to have an interview because many of those cases, unfortunately, are fraudulent. So you have to understand that those officers at the USCIS are just a bit critical of your application. At the interview, they might ask you, so what's the birth date of your spouse? Or they might ask, what's the wedding anniversary? Or how many people were present at your wedding ceremony? What is the favorite food of your spouse? If the officer has a serious suspicion that your case is fraudulent, he or she might conduct a so-called fraud interview or refer you to a different unit where a so-called fraud interview will be conducted. A fraud interview is basically just a more intense way of questioning spouses in this case, where the spouses would be separated. And there will be very specific questions asked in order to find out whether this is really a good faith marriage or whether this is a fraudulent marriage case. Nowadays, in many instances, the green card or adjustment interviews are waived. So it is possible that you do not receive a so-called interview notice in the mail, but just an approval notice, a so-called welcome notice, saying welcome to the United States. In such a case, you will usually receive the green card within a few weeks, if you're lucky, or within 1 year in the mail. If you need to travel urgently in the meantime and you do not have the green card yet, you can go to your local office and request a substitute, which is usually an I-551 stamp that will be placed into your passport. If you have an interview, the officer may place this I-551 stamp into your passport at the end of the interview, and that will be evidence that you've been approved for lawful permanent residence. That I-551 stamp is equivalent to the green card, and you may use it to travel outside the United States. USCIS interviews are a very complicated area. If you have any doubts, please consult an immigration attorney, especially if you see the words notice to appear, unlawful, deny, deportation. In such cases, it is a must that you contact an immigration attorney. If you need more information or have any questions or are not sure what the interview notice means or says, please consult an immigration attorney. Thank you.